Welcome to Meldon Law and Friends. I'm Jeffrey Meldon, founder and attorney at Meldon Law. I want to welcome our special guest, Mario Cartaya. He's a Gainesville resident now. However, Mario spent most of his life in South Florida after moving to South Florida from Cuba, which we're going to talk about as well. Welcome to the show, Mario.
Jeffrey, what a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
It's really exciting. You know, I know a lot about the amazing things you did in architecture. And as I understand it, you came to the United States at the age of, 8 or 9 years old?
I had just turned 9 years old.
Now, did you speak any English?
A little, enough to get me into a lot of trouble, but a little.
So I've read your book, Journey into the Vault, so I know a little bit about what led up to it, but I want to get into that a little later on. Okay, let's talk about your experience coming to the United States and what it was like for you to become a world-famous architect.
Ooh, well, that's a long stretch of time, but I'll try to make it short. When I lived in Cuba, my father was an accountant. His clients were all Americans. So I grew up in a house that it was customary that Americans would come to our house to have dinner with us, the CEOs of these different companies that my dad used to do the accounting for, Frigidaire, Sylvania, General Electric, these kinds of people would come in and out. So I grew up seeing Americans as very friendly, very honest, very wonderful people that worked with my dad, that appreciated him. So coming here, even though I came under some very troubled circumstances.
Yeah, you came over when Castro had come into power and was threatening your father.
Right. They wanted my dad to give him his ledgers with all of his American clients' properties so they could confiscate them, and my dad refused. And that led into a confrontation with Che Guevara, who then told him, you either give me these books or, your life is going to be threatened. You're not going to make it. And after he did give him the books, Guevara told him, if I were you, I will leave the country as soon as you can. I cannot guarantee your future safety here. So we left. So it was very traumatic, for me still being an 8-year-old when that happened, to think that you're going to lose your dad and you're going to lose all the family you're leaving behind. So what happened to me is that I came to a country that I kind of knew a little about. I mean, for me, becoming an American was easy because it was the land of Mighty Mouse. That's the cartoons I used to see when I was there. It was the land of Major League Baseball and cowboys, Roy Rogers. So how can you possibly not want to live in a land that offered these things to a kid? However, learning how to be an American was a little more difficult. I'll tell you a really funny story. I come here, I'm in the 4th grade, and I ended up making this friend who I knew him. Eventually, all the way through high school, we played baseball together at Miami Springs High. Wonderful friend. But I met him there in the 4th grade, right? We were buddies. One day I came into school and I was sick. I had, a runny nose and I had, the typical you being sick. And he comes to me and he goes, Mario, your nose is running. I thought he was laughing at my English. So I said, no. My nose no run. And he goes, yeah, and your feet smell. So I hit him. I have to stand up for my honor, so I hit him. Of course, we're buddies. It wasn't anything bad. We're 9 years old at the time. So nothing happened, but the principal brought in a translator who told the principal why I was upset, and he began laughing. And he goes, no. This is just the way Americans talk. This is part of the slang. So now I realize, okay, I have to not just refine my English, but learn the slang. Things just became a little more difficult because I don't want to get in trouble. I was a good kid.
So here you are. Where were you living? What part of Florida?
When we first came, we lived in Southwest 12th Avenue and 3rd Street, and then like 3-4 months later, we moved into the Alapata area, which was near Comstock Elementary School, and that's where this incident happened. In Comstock Elementary.
And so, did you have an early interest in architecture?
Yeah. I was very fortunate to grow up in a family that loved the arts. All of my uncles played instruments. And a family where I loved baseball because my father used to play baseball. But it was my grandfather that very early on saw something in me, and he would make me draw something almost every day. He would make me play with three-dimensional toys, And what he was doing, I think, was teaching me a different way of looking at things. And that starts my love of building things, which then leads to architecture. By the time that I left Cuba at age 9, 2-3 weeks after turning 9, I had realized I wanted to be an architect. So I came here with that dream. Everything else is just never losing sight of the goal, no matter the storms that come at you as you're growing up. And before I knew it, I'm at the University of Florida studying architecture, graduated from here, magna cum laude.
I understand you were first in your class, and
yes, I was.
This little kid from Cuba, all of a sudden, it comes to the University of Florida with one of the top architecture and building construction programs in the southeast United States.
But you don't do it alone. I had some mentors, both in high school. I had this mentor. He was the calculus teacher. Who was an ex-Korean sergeant, and he loved me. And he would always come to my baseball games, and he kind of took a special interest in pushing me to do more, to do better, to be successful. Then when I came here, I worked for an architect called Bill Epps. Bill became like a second father. And Bill was a perfectionist. He was such a person who would not take anything other than perfection, excellence. And I think I learned that from him. He's the guy that after I graduated from School of Architecture, first in my class and all that, and I'm thinking, okay, now I'm going to go make some money. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, you're not, Mario. I know you. You're going to want to start your company someday. You need to know how contractors think. You need to get a master's in building construction. So I said, really, Bill? Yeah, you do. I listened to him because I trusted him. So I got my master's in building construction with a minor in business law that he told me I had to take. Best decision I did, because later in my career, understanding the people that made my designs come true with their construction was everything in my career. Being able to be there with them, talk with them at their level, talk with them in the things that interested them, the priorities that they had, and then being able to work with them as partners all the way through my 43-year architectural business.
It's very interesting you talk about that, because my stepdaughter, Becky, is an architect, and she just finished up a large project in Israel, the National Library, and they had 3 architects there while they were doing the construction of the building, because, as you know, when the architect builds it and designs it one way, and then the building construction people come in, and when you're putting the masterpiece together, there's always there's questions that the building construction people have as far as how to execute, right?
Well, I tell you what I used to do. Some of the work that I've done in Fort Lauderdale International Airport, when you first drive in, they call that the Cartaya portal, because on the right you have Terminal 1 that I designed. On the left, you have the rental car facility that I designed, both national AIA award winners, but also the road that you drive in. All that I did as well. when you look at the Broward County Courthouse, something that I don't know whether you've been to it as an attorney, but what the courthouse meant, which was to protect the innocents who don't belong there, but because of a turn of events in their lives, they're forced to be there, for whatever reason. So the way I designed it in mind was to give them all the view of the ocean, give them the soft colors, give them the wood, give them anything that would lower their anxiety in a place that they really didn't belong, except for what might have happened to them.
Well, or I did both criminal defense and personal injury, so I was in courthouses a lot. And it is a very anxious time for people because it's like, oh, I'm going in front of a judge, and I don't know what this judge is going to do, except I know this judge has a lot of power. So the fact that you could design a courthouse with the interests of the people who actually it serves was very important.
Best sales job I ever did of a design to convince 97 judges that they did not need to have the view of the ocean.
Oh, the judges were thinking, well, we're the big shits. We should have the design. We should have the ocean view, right?
That belonged to the innocents. And the thing is, when your client understands and supports your views, then everything becomes easy.
Yeah.
And then they support it. But what I used to do, going back to your question about contractors and architects, very early on, as I'm designing, I would include the contractors. And I would ask them, what is the material that is the best price to build concrete today or steel? Depending on oil, you got to make that first decision. And then you go into the air conditioning system. What's the best air conditioning system that you can obtain now without having to bring it in from Seattle, right? These kinds of questions that take away having to do value engineering at the end. You're doing it as you're designing. That's what partnerships are. And that's why being friends with all these large contractors, the Balfour Beatties and the Pirtles and the Stiles and all these people, you could work with them. You could make them part of the system early on. So by the time that they do get selected, then they hit the ground running. And they helped in making the tough decisions that I had to make that may affect the price.
Right, and price is always a number
Well, of
one
course.
concern. And so by having your degree in architecture, a master's degree in building construction, and a business background, it enabled you to communicate more effectively.
Exactly. Thank you. Thanks to Bill Epps, who told me you need to do this. This is a guy who is an architect, he's a professor, he built himself, a great mentor. I did not become a success because of only me. It was me, my professors, my mentors, my teachers. It's all of us who cared to provide something better for the future. Leave something better than what you inherited.
Yeah, I know Bill Epps is a very famous professor and had an imprint on a lot of architects that knew him.
A wonderful man.
So you got prepared thanks to Bill Epps, right? And
others, of course. They were
Brisbane
Brown was another. There were several, but Bill's the guy I used to work with. So I was there every day in his office, and he would give me that look.
The look. It's like, we want excellence.
Yeah, nothing short of excellence.
So now, you've got your degrees, right? What was your first job out of school?
Well, my first job was in construction for 1 year. I went to work at Limbeck Construction in Houston for a year. I wanted to work in an office where I could learn how to do value estimating, and again, see what these guys do.
What's value estimating?
Well, to value estimate a project before it's put out for bids, and then during bidding, to see how do you get the dollars in, how do you communicate with the subs that are giving you dollars, How do you make sure that everything is covered, that there's nothing forgotten? Because I knew that that was going to be. But what happened is I began doing that. I took my state board exam. I passed it the first time. So that was the end of that. Now I'm an architect. Thank you for a wonderful year of learning Limbic. Now it's time for me to come back to Fort Lauderdale and start my architectural office.
So did you just open up your own office, or did you go work with someone?
Well, I worked for someone for about 8 months. And then I started my office. I was 26 when I started Cartaya and Associates. I was very young. And then I had it for 43 years.
Now, what kind of projects were you working on in the very beginning?
The very beginning, I was doing smaller projects. I was doing some homes. I was doing some duplexes. I was doing small stuff. And then something wonderful happened. The Jefferson people wanted an architect to do all of the revisions to all their stores that then complied with the ADA. So stairs, all these things, ramps.
Who is this, Jefferson?
Jefferson.
Oh, okay.
Their architect, who was older, didn't want to do it. To him, it was beneath him. So they hired me to do it. I applied, and I did it, and I did more, of course. I kind of expanded a little bit of the scope and began to recommend some things to them that they may want to do to make these retail stores work better. They were all 200,000 square foot retail shops, something like a Sears, right?
Huge.
So next thing I know, now they need someone to design 29 stores around the U.S., and I applied, and I got it.
Oh, wow.
Overnight, I am busy as can be. At the same time, I had this other man come in. Can you just do a rendering of this shopping center that I'm going to be building? Here's the plans. And I looked at it, and I did the renderings, and the guy came back and said, the building doesn't look very nice. Well, that's what you gave me. Well, I'm thinking of letting the architect go. I said, look, please, no, I don't want any part of this. Well, if I let him go, would you then design something for me? So, well, if you let him go, I'll call him, and if he's all right, I'll be happy to work with you. And all that happened, and I designed this new shopping center that he loved it. I got to do it. So all of a sudden, I'm busy as can be. And then came Miami Lakes, and I did 500 townhomes in Miami Lakes. All that happened in the first 2 years.
Oh, wow. Because you had told me that, but for those of you that are listening or watching, Miami Lakes was a development by the Graham family,
The Graham
right?
family, right.
Bob Graham was governor and senator from Florida for many, many years. Great man. I know you have a friendship with him while he was alive. So within the first 2 years, all of a sudden, okay, I've got all these Jefferson stores. Now I got, a mall or a shopping center, right? And then the Graham. How did you meet the Graham family?
Well, that was interesting. One of the guys that graduated with me from UF, building construction, became the president of their developing arm. And almost something exactly like Jefferson happened. The older architect retired, and they were looking for someone to design 500 townhomes. So
this is in Miami Lakes.
Miami Lakes, right? Mm-hmm. So he calls me up. Les Wirtz is this gentleman's name. He lives in Jacksonville now. He calls me up, so I go there. I meet with B. Graham, who was the guy in charge of the Graham family at the time there. And I figure before I do anything, let me go down to the building department, talk to the head of the zoning department, and see what he can do for me if I were to tie the 3 lakes that kind of were part of this development. So I met with him, and I said, I'm thinking about tying all these so you have one giant lake where people can go from one place to another. And he goes, Mario, if you did that, I think you may have enough acreage to make it a recreation area. But let's look at it right now. So we looked at the acreage. It was more than plenty. So now as a recreational area, I could now use any boat other than any boat that used gasoline. But like a sunfish or a sailboat or things like this, a canoe, a rowboat. And people could go from me putting in every townhouse a dock. You can go dock to dock, in that kind of lifestyle. Right? They were going to put fish in the lake. You could go fishing. And all of a sudden, everything changed. But with that, the head of zoning told me, we can give you a 10% additional density. You want to do 500 townhomes, you will be entitled to do 550. So I go back to the presentation against the other architects and I said, I got this for you. We're going to make it into a little Venice complex, explain the docks and the boats and all that. But the carrot is that you'll be able to do 550 units, not just 500. I'm in.
You're in. There you go. Oh, and for those of my father was a real estate developer. Okay, and for those of you listening and watching, it's very important as far as being able to create greater density, particularly if it works well, if it's exactly. Designed well, right? And density is, some people choose to live on 40 acres of property and they don't want anybody around and all that. But most people want to live particularly in a city. You want to have a certain amount of facilities and density so that people actually would enjoy themselves more and turning it into a little Venice, right?
With your rear yard being a recreational lake.
That was the key. So then you're doing all this stuff, but you had another 35, 40 years of your career. What else did you do?
Well, the Miramar Town Center, not just a master plan, but also the City Hall and the Entertainment Center and a combination Broward College and Nova Southeastern University building, the police station, all that, all the lakes, everything, retail and all that, which comes out in the front page of the Wall Street Record.
The Wall Street Record or Journal?
Journal. The Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. Which is what everybody, all the developers read.
So front page, there's my page. There's a design that shows what I created, this entire town center, with the caption, America's only true town center, because it had everything in it. So I got a phone call one day, and my secretary goes, there's this French guy on the phone, and he says he wants to talk to you. So I answered the phone. I said, hello, Mario? Yes. Who is this? Bernard Arnault.
For those of you that don't know who Bernard Arnault is, Louis Vuitton and about 20 other luxury brands, right?
So now I have no idea who Bernard Arnault is. So we begin talking. He goes, Mario, I just bought an island in the Bahamas, and I would like an architect to design an island that's completely off the grid. I've heard your name several times. I'm reading it in the Wall Street Journal. Are you the architect for me? I said, Bernard, I would love to be the architect for you. Well, when can we meet? I said, well, if you want to, it'll take you about a week to get your ticket. And how about next week? Because Mario, I can be there tomorrow morning. And that's when it first hit me. Who is this guy? That can fly from Paris to Fort Lauderdale tomorrow morning.
See you in the morning.
Yeah, right? So I asked, after I said, sure, I'll cancel my schedule, come over. And then I asked my secretary, please look into this guy. At the time, was the richest man in the world. He owned the De Beers diamond mines, too.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next day, he comes over. I get my engineer over, and I ask him, silly, how do we negotiate? You being, oh, Mario, I trust you. I want you to be my architect. Just bill me by the hour. That'll work. I trust you. Easiest negotiation I ever had with any clients. And 8 years later, the island is completely off the grid. And it was a success. So again, it's funny how you do something, it turns out, like Bill Epps would say, it proves that you're an excellent person doing an excellent, design. And if you do the right thing, people notice. It makes you different.
It's absolutely amazing that you were able to build a successful company as quickly as you did. I think one of the reasons is that you prepared yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Preparation. What do they say that, luck is when you've prepared yourself and the opportunity comes around, right?
Exactly.
That's like, oh, okay, I was lucky. Well, I prepared myself to be lucky, okay? And that's what I hear. I want to switch the conversation back to your book, Journey Back into the Vault, a moving account of the human spirit that you wrote in 2022. I've had a chance to read part of it and was very moved by it. Why don't you tell our listeners how this book came about?
My exit from Cuba was traumatic. What I didn't know is that after I got to the U.S., my subconscious took all those Cuban memories. I lost my family. I never saw them again.
Yeah, I read in your book, your uncles and
my
grandparents.
They all died. I never saw them again.
Well, you left, in 1960?
1960, right.
And then your relatives had all died by 1968, I think?
Yeah, and during those first 8 years, they all died.
And so were you able to communicate with
No.
family?
Don't forget, the early 60s was an era that had the Cuba Missile Crisis, had the Bay of Pigs fiasco, had all kinds of horrible things happen. The president of the U.S. gets murdered. His brother gets murdered. There was no communication with Cuba whatsoever. There was no phone. There was no money.
Russia decided they wanted to have an outpost in the the Americas, and they saw the opportunity with Cuba.
Exactly. So it was the only communications we did have was with telegrams, and those were limited, I think, to 7 or 8 words. So we would get like, your grandfather is dying. That's it. Because they could only fit, so many words in a telegraph. So it was a very difficult time to see your family that you loved, that I lived with. I lived with my grandparents and my parents and my uncles in the old Spanish way, where you all live in a big house and you have your own room and everything else. Right? So 56 years later, wonderful things are happening to me. I am helping President Obama in his rapprochement trip to Cuba, working with John Kerry in the group that helped Obama do his trip.
In other words, that was to try to figure out some way to reestablish relationship with Cuba in a positive way.
So when the time came that the group went, I was asked to go, and I didn't, because I did not feel right. Something inside me did not feel right going back with some things I felt that I had to exorcise, for lack of a better word, right? There was something bothering me, like this dark cloud that I could not understand, that kept me. It wasn't the hatred for the government, it was something else. And I began to question, what's wrong with me? I can't remember anything. And then finally, I gave in to wanting to know. I knew who I had become. I had become an architect of note. I didn't know how I got from there to here. I was missing almost 9 years of my life. So I did go. I went with two friends. One that wanted to see Cuba through my eyes because he was born here, but his parents were Cubans, and he wanted to see the land that he had heard so much about growing up with his parents. The other guy just wanted to go play. You know?
Not bad if you're going.
which turned out to be perfect because during the day, I was going through my changes. I was going through all these emotional things, all these psychological, mind-bending stuff that were happening to me. But then at night, I was able to talk about it with my two best buddies, and then drink, laugh, have fun. It was the perfect yin to the yang, only to do it again the next day. It was perfect, the way that I did it. And when I came back, I had come back now with all these events that happened, which I then realized were possible because of the stimulus of me returning to the house where I was born, the other house where I grew up, the school that I went to. What happened to me, I now know, is that my subconscious buried my Cuban history in a place I call the vault, a place that is so tightly closed that you can't go in. The mind cannot go in. You're being protected from yourself so you can move forward. In my case, protect me from, keep replaying the same horrible nightmare and concentrate on becoming a little American boy. Right. And then an architect. And then get the projects. There's always something that is keeping you from going backwards so you can go forwards. Going back brought back all the memories. But when they came back, Jeffrey, they did not come back as just a memory. They came back in reels of movies. I now also know that when you remember something, you're really remembering what you used to remember, and then all the changes you've made along the way. Your memories are inaccurate as you grow old, because as you begin to forget things, your subconscious makes up stuff.
We fill in the blanks.
Exactly, so you don't forget it.
Right.
It's a self-preservation of a memory. In my case, since I didn't remember anything for 56 years, they were not corrupted. So they come back in movies. I could hear my father's voice. Imagine that. I could hear my mother's voice. When I went to my school, I saw all of my school friends sitting in their desks. It was the most beautiful week of my life. As I went back to my childhood, I relived it in a week. And now I come back knowing who I really am. And by doing that, I'm bonded once again with my parents. I'm bonded once again with my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts. I went to a place that caused me so much pain. And what I got out of it was an inner peace I never knew I needed. Unbelievable and beautiful. And that's why my buddy said, you got to write about this. So I did.
Well, you did an incredible job. I know the reviews on the book are fantastic. What I've read is very, very well written. And, for those of you that have been listening, you know that Mario tries for, excellence. And I think you accomplished in this book. We were talking about your visit because it was in, May of 2016 that you went back to Cuba. And that was a time when Cuba was opened up. President Obama felt like the best way to bring Cuba into, democracy, into the world that we experience in the United States was to open up travel between the United States and Cuba. We were so close. So I got to go back to Havana and spend 4 or 5 days there with some friends, okay? And I just wanted to kind of share the experience that I had, because when I went back to the city, number one, it was a big, beautiful city. I think Havana may have been, the most important capital in the Caribbean over the years. There, the beauty and the architecture of the city, you could see had once been great and was now falling apart, which was very, very sad. What was really interesting, though, was they had different taxi drivers. Some were in the new cars from Russia, and then others were these old 1950 cars that we see in the movies and all around, that were, for the most part, owned individually by young men, sometimes older men, who were ambitious and wanted to figure out a better future. So whenever myself and my friends traveled, we always would get a taxi from one of the, I call it, the local folks who were trying to make a better life for themselves. And it was so interesting because we'd say, what do you, tell us what it's like being a taxi driver, and what are your ambitions and what do you want to do? And they were all saying, we're doing this, number one, because we can make good money doing this. And number two, we want to save up enough money so we can buy a house or an apartment or a condo or something, so that we can start to, have our own life and our business. And it was a very special time for me listening to them, because there was so much optimism in Cuba. What was your experience going through Havana?
Exactly the same thing. We had a driver. One of the drivers that drove the Obama contingency that went there is the one that I asked to drive me. And everywhere you went, you heard the same thing. We have oxygen now. Tenemos oxígeno. And oxygen is what they said that Obama gave them when he spoke from the Gran Teatro, and said to the Cuban president that, why do you fear your youth? Cuba should be about emboldening the youth. That gave them the oxygen. They called the changes that were happening el cambio, which means the change. And everywhere you went, you heard the same thing. One of the places that my buddies wanted to go, especially my third buddy, wanted to go, was a private club. I thought it was a great idea, so that I could see a private club owned by one of these Cubans, like you were saying, that were doing well with the new changes in 2016. And we went there. And I sat back watching all these young people in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're having shots, multiple shots of Havana Club at $7, not Cuban pesos, at $7 each. And I was wondering, how can you afford to buy this? So I began to ask him. All night, though, there was this one guy who sat with this woman, and he kept buying him and her drinks. And people kept coming to his table. So I'm thinking, A, he's either government, an undercover guy, or B, he owns it. So about 2 a.m, emboldened as I was by the alcohol, I went over to go see him. And I said, look, I've been watching you all night, and everybody seems to come to your table. Do you own this place? And he laughed. And he goes, all night I've been watching you too, and my friends come here, and they all are asking me the same question. Who is this guy? And why does he care how I can afford to buy a glass of rum? So I said, okay, you go first. And he said, no, I'm an accountant. And everybody that you see here are people that have started their own businesses. And now they have disposable income. Well, if you're an accountant, what are you doing here at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday? He goes, well, this is where I come to meet people like you, who I may not know. And then when I see you buying these drinks, I offer you my accounting services. This is where I meet my clients. And I almost teared up. First, I wanted to laugh, and then I almost teared up because it hit me. This guy's networking at 2 in the morning. The future of capitalism in Cuba is with him.
Correct.
And it hit me, the changes that I was witnessing. You know, a future that I thought at that point was irreversible. And then it all died. And that's the sad thing. 2016, 2017, 2018, Cuba had an economy like it had never had since the Castro brothers took over, and then it died.
Yeah, I know that the spirit that I witnessed was amazing. What was the name of the club you went to? Do you remember?
The private club?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Because I went to a private
Luna,
club.
It wasn't Luna Negra, but something like that.
I went to, I think it was the Club de Musica or something like that.
Well, that's a government-owned chain. They have many of those.
Oh, they do?
El Palacio de la Música.
Yeah, okay. So anyhow, so we went there, and we were out late, you know, and a lot of young people were dancing, having a good time. It was, you know, full of life. And the fact is that, you know, when it comes to, you know, music, the arts, you know, creativity, that the Cuban culture was far ahead of anybody else in the Caribbean. I mean, Cuba was an incredible country. You know, I noticed that in reading your book that, you know, originally your dad was not fond of Batista because he had some heavy-handed measures as well, mm-hmm. and that he welcomed in Castro in the beginning. He thought he was going to help.
No, my father did not welcome Castro in the beginning. And I can tell you, when Castro was coming from the east part of the island, they were giving all these like stickers to put in your front door that said, Fidel, esta es tu casa. Fidel, this is your home. And my father said no.
Oh, he did?
No, we're not doing that. This is our home.
Oh.
But like everybody else, it's okay, let's wait and see what happens. Don't forget, he had been interviewed in the Sierra Maestra when he was up in the mountains fighting, and he said, I'm not a communist. I am going to have free elections. He said all that. Right. So let's wait and see what happens. It didn't take long before the crime started. And he began to then kill thousands and thousands of Cubans in these kangaroo courts. I remember watching that, where in the morning they would bring up somebody, some woman will begin yelling, you know, he's the one that killed my husband, blah, 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 blah. No trial. Once somebody said that guilty, and that afternoon, they put him in a firing squad. It was that kind of thing. And that's when my father said, okay, this is not good. He wasn't for him, he wasn't against him.
You know,
at the very beginning, let's see what happens. Like most people.
Yeah,
let's see what it brings.
So my wife is born in Cuba, in Guantanamo, and her father initially thought that the change would be good. I mean, Batista was a dictator, and for some people, you know, things were not great. So my wife's older brother, by 2 or 3 years, I think he was born in 1958 or 59, her father named him Fidel as his middle name, okay? Because there was hope. And he thought that maybe, you know, you were going to get rid of the dictator and bring in free elections and education and all the things that were missing. And ironically, Castro threw him in prison for 3 years because they accused him of being a CIA spy with no evidence, right? So, you know, when I mentioned about your dad, I know you'd mentioned something in the book that the jury was kind of out on what Castro was going to do for the country, and that there was hope that, okay, this is going to, you know, turn into something better rather than worse. And then within a very short period of time, they became worse than Batista.
Right.
You know,
Within months, even Camilo Cienfuegos left him, and he went back to his city in Cienfuegos, where he began to talk about the crimes that were committed, because I didn't buy into this. This is his right-hand man, right. Camilo, his prime tactician. And Castro called them to come to Havana in order to talk their grievances out. The plane that he was coming in never made it.
So that's
so even that, right?
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the end of the show. I could go on for hours. We're going to have part 2.
Well, I do have to mention something, because the things that you're discussing, I'm working on now. I have a book that's going to come out, probably the end of the year will be published. I'm just about done with it, called 100 Years of Friendship, a Cuban and American story, 1860 through 1960, that talks about an era that no one talks about. Nobody talks about that American-Cuban friendship and how it benefited both countries. And since my story as an architect was read into the United States Congress, and then a flag.
Yeah, that's amazing. For those of you listening, Mario actually had his story written in. He went up to Washington, D.C. and tell the story. It's a great story.
Well, my history as an architect was read into the U.S. Congress by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and then, of course, a couple of years later, when I retired, they flew a flag over the Capitol in my honor, to honor my American legacy, you know. And it was just the kind of things that you wish that your parents were there. They had both already perished, so they did not get to see it. But it's an affirmation of not just my parents, but all the other people, including Bill Epps, all these people that pushed me to be the very best version of myself, right? Just a beautiful moment. But part of that is the fact that they gave me the same rights as any sitting U.S. Senator or Congressman to be able to go into the Library of Congress and see things that the average citizen would not be allowed to see. And so since they gave me that privilege, I spent all of last year looking at data from the Times, beginning in 1860. Data that spoke about that friendship. Whether it is data from the U.S. Consumer Services or data from the FBI or data and the Department of Navy during the Second World War, data that allowed me to put a book together of things that I had never heard of. I've seen it, I've showed it to people, University of Miami. If they never knew of any of this, it's all going to come out in the book, and I think it's going to forever change the way that we look at each other. And what I hope is that I'll be allowed to go back to Congress next year and be able to give a presentation to Congress or a select committee that they may want to select to hear the things that I found out. Because that may change the way that we think about this troublesome island 90 miles from Key West.
Well, I'll tell you, having been to Havana, it made me understand a little bit more about how remarkable your homeland of Cuba is. In some ways, it's sad because you see the buildings falling. It's like a birthday cake, getting rained on and falling apart. You see some of these buildings and things going on, and you go, "Oh my God, this is such an amazing place," and nobody's taking good care of it. And on the other hand, you and I were there at a time of hope and ambition, and I think that was very special. I can't wait to show you some of the pictures that I took and what I experienced, because it really had a profound effect on me and an understanding of how great a country Cuba is, and it's not just some pain in the ass island. It's off of the United States.
I can't wait for you to read 100 Years of Friendship. I think you're going to love it.
Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us, Mario Cartaya. This has been great. I could go on and on. We'll have to have you back for edition number 2 after your book is published, okay? Just 1 minute here. I'm going to read off a couple of the events going on in our wonderful community. We're very lucky that Mario and his beautiful wife, Pamela, live here in Gainesville now, and we've become good friends, so that's exciting. We have July 4th coming up, and in Williston, they're having an Independence Day celebration, July 3rd, from 5 p.m. It starts off with a parade, and then starting at 7 o'clock, there's more partying going on, and fireworks begin at dark. In Ocala, the World Equestrian Center, which I call the Disney World for horse people, is having 100 jumpers all summer long through August 10th. Take the family out. If the kids haven't seen professional world-class riding, they'll love the World Equestrian Center. Our town and garden show at the Alachua County Sports and Events Center in Celebration Point. We're right here in Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, which is an amazing place. It's both a museum and a restaurant, and we're very fortunate to have the support of Spurrier, Steve Spurrier, and everybody on the team, including Freddie Wiebe, to create this amazing podcast room. So that's pretty cool. So let's support the home show is really cool. I was there last year. Again, it's August 23rd and 24th right here in Celebration Point. There's a new Alachua County Sports and Events Center right here in Celebration Point. So check it out. They're having all kinds of sporting events. It's very, very cool place. The North Central Florida Outdoor Expo, that same weekend at the World Equestrian Center, and get out there, enjoy it. There's a lot going on within our community all over North Central Florida, and I want to thank you for both listening and watching Meldon Law and Friends, and thank you again, Mario, for being our guest. It's a pleasure and a great friendship. So that's a wrap for this edition of Meldon Law and Friends, and we'll see you next week.
Go Gators!
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm joining the band, of course. Since Meldon Law is the official law firm partner of the Florida Gators, I want to help.
Dad, we're litigators. Let's stick to helping people in the courtroom.
Well, can we still hang out and jam a little bit? At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
I was going down a one-way street and a girl that was driving her car T-boned me on my scooter. I ended up going for an MRI and discovering that I had 2 herniated discs. Coming to Cary allowed me to not have to worry about what doctor I was going to see or what physical therapist I had to go to. They say, these are the people we trust. You're going to have a great experience there. And I honestly did each time.
Call Meldon Law. Your consultation is absolutely free.
And I was in an accident. Someone ran a red light and hit me, and I was hurt. You don't know where to turn. Luckily, I called Jeffrey. These big insurance companies, they don't want you to win. They truly don't. But Jeffrey and his firm and the people that work here, they just really fight for you. You call the law offices of Jeffrey Meldon, because you're going to need help, and they will help you.
Call Meldon Law right now.
Hey, Sammy, look who's there. Say hi.
Hey!
You again.
Meldon Law, Jeffrey speaking.
Somebody hit us.
Here we go again.